Gichi Manitou, it's a Native American word meaning great spirit. That's the name of this area here. For many centuries it was considered to be a place of peace and of healing by the Native Americans.
Gichi Manitou is still a beautiful nature preserve just across the border in Iowa, only 10 miles from Sioux Falls. Doug Haar works with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and looked after the area for over 25 years.
Gichi Manitou is particularly unique because it has designation as a preserve in several different categories.
Due to its nature of being off the beaten path, it has been the location of some illicit behavior. In 1973, 5 Sioux Falls teens chose Gichi Manitou as their party destination.
There was a group of high school students from Sioux Falls who'd gone up to the very northwest corner of the preserve, probably within 50 to 100 feet of the South Dakota border. And they had a campfire going on a little rock outcropping or below a little rock outcropping.
And they noticed 3 men up on a ridge.
The Fryer brothers had come to the park. They came upon this group of teenagers and their campfire and apparently assumed that these kids were doing drugs or something up there, and they decided to do something about it.
And the men started shooting at them and came down there and took the 4 boys
and walked them back to the old shelter house, killed the boys, and took the young girl hostage and took her to an abandoned building, held her there for a few days, and then finally released her on the promise that she wouldn't tell anybody what had happened, and of course she did.
Gichi Manitou has always commanded respect. Still, it's just not a place that many people say they would want to be after dark.
A lot of people still consider it to be a spiritual place.
The Native Americans that apparently considered the rock outcroppings there at Gichi Manitou to be a holy area or spiritual area of some sort.
A lot of people who talk about this place say they've come out here, say that they've had strange experiences, but it's assumed that they're encountering the spirits of the boys that were killed out here.
I have many times went to Gichi very late at night with friends for a little thrill. I decided to take a friend who was unfamiliar with the area, and we walked to the buildings. While on the way back, we kept hearing voices, so I called out, but there was no answer. After a brief search, we got freaked out on account of the full moon and the voices, so we hightailed it out of there.
Back in the late 1980s, we had quite a rash of stories of unidentified lights of different kinds being seen in the area. Some people claimed that they were coming down from the sky, that it was aliens or some sort of spacecraft or something, and others that claimed they saw lights moving through the grass or the trees there.
Without concrete evidence of spirits and other unusual activity, it's hard to say what makes this site such a haunting one to visit. For those who know the story of what happened more than 30 years ago, this story lacks closure and haunts them emotionally.
I don't know, this one is kind of different though, because it's 3 brothers. I mean, how often do you see 3 brothers go out and commit murder?
The horror of that night at Gichi Manitou Preserve is recent enough that it still generates conversation among those who remember. Our next stop poses an interesting question. What happens if a haunted site vanishes over time? Rena Ballou and our ghost hunting crew headed west to find out, with a stop at historic Fort Randall Military Post.
Scenic Fort Randall Military Post. Though it's been decommissioned for over a century, remnants of the once active military outpost can be seen throughout the hillside.
This fort was basically built for westward expansion into what they call the Louisiana Purchase. It was built in 1856. It was in existence until 1892.
At one time, over 2,000 people, including military members and their families, called the fort home. But life at the fort was isolated. For some, it was unbearable.
There's a commander's officer's quarters down here. It was a 2-level structure, and one of the bedrooms was rumored to have a soldier commit suicide in it. And it was also rumored that his spirit came back, and they said they saw a ghostly apparition. So they immediately locked the door and never went back in there again.
Today, most of the military post structures are gone. The most prominent remaining building is the old chapel, which has received a much-needed overhang for protection against the elements, courtesy of the Corps of Engineers.
Using maps and various markers located around the site, visitors can figure out where all the different buildings used to be here at Fort Randall, including the allegedly haunted commanding officer's quarters. But what happens to his spirit when the building it used to haunt disappears?
Chad Lewis and Terry Fisk first studied the grounds and also further discussed the story of the officer's suicide with Mark. With no obvious signs of a spirit present, Chad shared his ideas of what can happen to a homeless ghost.
Well, there are several theories at places like this. One being that the ghost or the spirit was attached to the location or the structure itself, and that could continue on forever regardless of whether or not there's a structure here.
In the town of Gregory, it's almost become a rite of passage to have the high school upperclassmen escort the less fortunate underclassmen to the local IOOF cemetery, then leave them stranded there to take in the sights all by themselves. So what's so fascinating about this cemetery, cared for by the International Order of Oddfellows?
There's a cemetery located in the town of Gregory that has had locals talking for decades. From glowing tombstones to a meandering old man, the IOOF cemetery has had its share of local legends. When our crew decided to stop for a visit, we were immediately referred to a local historian and grave locating extraordinaire, Richard Popacek.
The story about this one is that there's a white-haired gentleman that wanders the roads around this area. There's kind of a main county road goes by here, and he looks like he's lost something, and when people turn around to go back and help him, he's disappeared.
Terry Fisk and Chad Lewis have certainly investigated their share of cemetery stories and know right where to begin.
We do try to get as much information about the apparition as we can, a description of the person, and talk to some of the local people that who might possibly know who this could be.
On this occasion, Terry and Chad are in luck. Emmett Cadabra is the local funeral director and believes he knows the old man who inspired the stories.
There was an old hermit that lived right at the north edge of this cemetery. He lived there for many, many years, all by himself, and he would wander through here on his way home or on his way to town or something, and when they'd see him going through the cemetery, they'd say, "Oh, look," and so because here was this eccentric person running through the cemetery, they'd let their imaginations take a hold of them.
The details gained from these one-on-one interviews help the ghost hunters piece these legends together.
Well, could you describe what he looked like?
Well, he was short, and he was very ruddy in complexion, unkept.
And do you know how long these stories have been circulating about the weird activity going on in the cemetery?
Well, I heard him when I was a child. That's 50 years ago.
Okay.
Town historian Richard Popacek has a theory as to why this cemetery may be so restless.
A lot of the people that lived in this country were kind of characters, so most likely they do have some pretty colorful spirits.